Sentinel's talk show, the show where CISOs and cybersecurity leaders go beyond buzzwords to share real, battle-tested insights. As usual, I'm your host, Dr. Ozkaya, and today I have the absolute privilege of speaking with Chaim Sanders, the CISO from Lyft. He's a good friend of mine. He spent lots of time in the industry. Instead of me talking all day about him, let me invite him to the stage and he introduced himself. Chaim, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me, Erdal. It's great to see you again.
Honestly, it's always a great pleasure to be with you online, physically, or even on the phone. Thank you again. So Who are you? Where do you work? What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Chaim Sanders, as you said. I work as the CISO for Lyft right now, which is a rideshare company in the US. Before that, I was at Okta doing identity security. And before that, I was in both government, academia, consulting, really all over the map in terms of the security space. I've done nearly everything you can do in the space.
You speak in conferences, I know that too.
Yeah, speaking at conferences, talks, talking to people, trying to promote education of the space as well. There's a lot of different ways that we can make the next generation of security folks more effective than we are today.
And truly, that's what I love the most about you. If you're ready, let's start helping the community.
Sure, let's jump into it.
Perfect. You are not just a CISO who understands business. You are a CISO who comes from technical field. And as a CISO, what would you recommend other CISOs to improve their security posture?
Yeah, that's a really astute observation. And we're seeing more CISOs than ever coming from the technical side of the house, because boards and other organizations, which I'm sure we'll talk about, are demanding that the technical capabilities are there, not just the business capabilities. So from a technical side of the house, the most important thing to do is to nail the basics. I'm sure many CISOs who I would talk to, and I've spoken with quite a few in the past couple of days alone, have said the same thing over and over again. Before you start thinking about the most aggressive current threat that doesn't have controls available, think about what your risk management process looks like. Think about deploying basic controls that are available today to provide things like multi-factor authentication, provide things like vulnerability management, supply chain dependency analysis, determine whether or not your machines are compromised. So things like endpoint EDR, endpoint detection and response. These types of basic tools aren't so simple to master. And once you do master them, once you are in the top 10% of the users of that base of tool, you'll really give your organization a head start against attackers who are otherwise going to be using traditional techniques most commonly and not going to be leveraging that 0 day that you need to defend against. They're not going to be leveraging the most advanced tactics. So again and again, the answer is always going to be, you got to do the basics well and better than your nearest competition so that when they fall, you don't fall to the same problem.
Honestly, I love what you said, and it always comes to this. Many CISOs, while know they have to follow the basics, many still believe that buying products, that when someone gets hacked, they think, oh, we had the most sophisticated attack. Honestly, someone who comes from the academia, like yourself, like myself, when we look at the attack patterns, like ransomware, is it new? No. People say, oh, yeah, 2016, 2017, WannaCry. No. The first ransomware attack happened in 1980s in a hospital with a physical floppy disk encryption. So it just evolved. And if we follow the basics, as you said, I'm pretty sure we're going to be in a much better state. So talking about this, what is the biggest challenge in making the recommendations that you just mentioned? Yeah, it's easy to say follow the basics. I'm pretty sure, someone who has lots of experience like you faced lots of challenges. How did you overcome?
Yeah. One of the biggest issues that you're going to face as a CISO, and really throughout the cyber industry as it matures, is it is a risk management environment. You're dealing with risks to a business, and evaluating them without an understanding of how the business works or what it values is not going to be an effective measure. I'll take an example of something that's usually pretty poor at organizations, something that I've been talking to a lot of folks about recently, which is if you go and get a tool that will tell you about vulnerabilities in your code, for instance, you're going to say, hey, I have a CVSS score of 10 for this particular area. That actually has no real reliance or relevance to your business and what the risk looks like to the actual underlying organization. You've seen a lot of focus on this from the SEC lately with materiality clauses where they say your actual issue needs to be reflected from a materiality perspective for the organization. And so many times you might see ransomware, for instance, or you might not even hear about it, but it happens. Ransomware in a part of the business that's not material to the organization. Is that a 10 out of 10 risk? Well, from the tool's perspective, it is. But from a CISO's perspective, you really need to put things in the right context in order to be sure of how you're going to rank things and how you're going to escalate and prioritize your issues and your risks that you see.
Thank you, Chaim, and really great insights. So my other question is going to be then straight away. You work in an innovative company, Lyft. How do you balance innovation with risk, especially when enabling new business technologies like AI, cloud, or IoT? IoT is, I think, also important with you because you have thousands of drivers, cars all across US. I think this question can help CISOs who often face pressure from both business enablers and protectors, and your answer can hopefully give them some insights to improve their posture.
Yeah. This is a tricky one. It's actually a tricky one even compared to many of the folks who you've had on this show before, and that's because based on the organization you're supporting, the risk tolerance changes rather drastically. So when we start talking about securing, for instance, a stuffed animal manufacturer, where we actually have the most amount of 8Ks in the past year is in manufacturing, or breaches in the past year, that security and risk tolerance looks a lot different than securing a government or a bank or healthcare. And this is how you sort of have to balance risk. You can't come in to a board or even a technical group that are reporting to you and say, we need to solve everything and we need to spend more and more money. You cannot do that in an effective way. You have to say, what are the most important things to resolve for us? What are most likely to be the risks that we're going to see? You talked about ransomware as a common risk, and the origin of that almost all the time now is phishing. I don't know the last time I saw, SQL injection leading to humongous data breach. It's not that common because it's so simple to go do phishing. And we have some protections.
And effective, right? For doing a SQL attack, you have to go one by one or create some scripts, but phishing, send it to millions of people, and within 1 hour, there's going to be at least 10% clicking based on Microsoft Digital the report which they published recently.
Yeah. And we've started seeing controls against phishing, right? We've seen phishing-resistant MFA becoming widely ubiquitous within the industry, or approaching more ubiquity, I guess I'll say. And we've started seeing attackers moving to the next easiest target. We started seeing, for instance, targeting weaker members of the employee base. So IT help desk getting reset, like we saw with MGM. We saw with Marks and Spencer's just this early this week that it was, at least it's been reported that it was consultants from Tata that ended up being the ingress port. Whether or not that remains to be true. And we saw with Coinbase earlier this week.
Exactly, same way.
Yeah, the attackers are going to go with the easiest route. Getting a computer science degree is not going to be the route that most attackers are going to go with, and like reverse engineering, coming up with a protocol, understanding. They're going to just go with the easiest route, and that's what you have to start by defending against. And as you're doing that, that gives you some capability, depending on your industry, to take a look back and say, what are the chances that attackers are going to be able to effectively exploit things like my IoT, like my AI models that are out? What types of defenses am I building around them? Am I building defense in depth? Am I exposing, for instance, in AI models to my customers? Do I give them agentic properties, the capability to modify things? Or are we just providing them data? If I'm just providing them data, how do I test my models in order to ensure that they're not going to go away? Will my customers actually care if there is a breach of a small scale in this nature, or if there's a vulnerability discovered? The answer is maybe yes, probably yes. How much will they care? Right? This is the unique domain of a CISO and a risk management organization to say, my company, my organization has these business priorities. We'll be able to reduce costs by moving to IoT-driven XYZ, right? Manufacturing. We'll be able to reduce costs by using an LLM to help prioritize inbound help requests. These are beneficial to the organization. They're willing to accept some level of risk in order to support them. Your job as a security organization, an information security organization, is A, to tie that into an enterprise risk management process, and B, to inform the stakeholders of what the risks that could possibly materialize at this point in time are, and as time goes on, how those risks evolve. Is it still worth it to take that risk? So to look at this in a different perspective, I was speaking with a number of CISOs at a recent conference, and we were talking about use of LLMs. And I and one of my peers, we had quite a few use cases that we're doing internally. And actually, I know quite a few organizations are. But a lot of the organizations in the room represented healthcare and banking and government. And their response was completely different. They said, we don't allow LLMs at all. We have very specific use cases. We disable Copilot. And I said, this is maybe reasonable for your organization, but it's a mistake for you personally to not understand how the technology works and how it could work for you. And so, yeah, it is really, as you said, it's a balance. It's a balance between risk and benefit to the organization, and you have to understand both sides of the story.
I had, believe it or not, a similar conversation with a CISO just last week. He's like, oh, I invited him to the show. He's like, no, I don't want to be in your show. And I'm like, why? He said, you are working for Microsoft and Microsoft is stealing my data. I'm like, excuse me? I said, yeah, I use Copilot. I'm like, hold on. Microsoft is not just coming and grabbing your information. It is what you share with them and how you share with them. And Microsoft has an example, right? Google or OpenAI or you name it. All these AI providers, we know that. It's not a secret. AI is good as the data is. And I understand why healthcare providers are hesitant when it comes to AI, because, my data is the most important data. I could be a politician who's just about, like, we had it recently in US, Joe Biden, right? He was not healthy enough to be re-elected. Last minute, it changed. Just imagine I'm the next president candidate. I know, I was not born in the US. Okay, just an example. But one day before the election, my health data leaks and says I got cancer stage 4. Most probably I'm not going to be elected. Most probably. So I understand where they're coming from. But looking at AI is going to help. I mean, this, I know, I met you back then as well. We spoke about it. Remember when cloud was new? Everybody said, oh, I don't want to be in cloud because cloud is going to do this. And today, you cannot live without cloud. And a great example was during pandemic. People who didn't adopt the latest technology, who didn't transform digitally, fall behind and they couldn't work. Same thing applies to AI. While Microsoft, Meta, Google publicly says they're replacing humans with AI, 30%, 50%, I just make the numbers now up, 30%, 30% is not made up. It's replaced, their code is written by AI. So resistance is not the right thing. I love your approach, and I think everybody should listen to that.
I agree. I'll give another example. You gave the example about cloud. It's more recent, but I like to look back at history. It tends to repeat itself as you're demonstrating.
Exactly.
But if we walked into a security office from 1998, which didn't exist, right? But let's pretend we had security like we had today then, and we said, hey, we're going to take that desktop off the desk. We're going to unlock it, and we're going to let people carry it around. Oh, and we're going to make internet wireless. We're going to make internet wireless.
No
so
way.
that you'd say, absolutely not. We can't do that. But the reality is that if you don't do that as a business, then your competitor is going to do that unless there's regulation that's stopping them from doing it. And then they'll be able to compete with you far more effectively. You need to be able to be dynamic with the business that's coming around. And this is a lesson that security folks have learned the hard way time over time. I remember, as you were sort of saying, when we met many years ago, we were talking about risks from cloud when it was first coming out. And I remember I did an assessment for a large organization in the US, and they said, oh yeah, we want to move all of our cloud over to a third party, or all of our internal services to a third party provider. And it was before cloud, and I remember saying, that seems really dangerous. How are you going to know about logs? How are you going to know about the security of this? And they said, oh, we won't. And I said, I can't recommend this. This is a terrible idea. And now we look forward, and of course, that's the entire basis for the entirety of the suite of products that we use day to day at Lyft, for example. It's an entirely SaaS-based organization.
Great example.
So how do you support that? And
Great example.
how do you deal with that risk, right? Like the last thing you talked about is someone says, Microsoft is stealing my data. It's like, well, so are all the other third parties that you use, if you believe that. So then what are you going to put in place? Are you going to put DPAs in place? Are you going to put BAAs in place? What are you going to do when your vendor, for instance, won't accept a BAA because they don't want the HIPAA liability, which is becoming a very common practice these days? How do you deal with third-party security? Well, the answer is we're finding out that third parties are the cause of almost every breach that's not related to privacy fines. I just talked about Marks and Spencer's. That was a third-party consulting firm. We talked about Coinbase, where we're talking about BPOs. So this happens consistently, and we've seen this time over time when we start talking about, I'll give a T-Mobile example, right? The T-Mobile breach started from networking hardware. That networking hardware is a third party. How do you secure these? How do you ensure
that you're... What is that a third party? Tell me. I mean, just imagine, forget about Lyft but just imagine, how are you going to work without Windows, Apple, or Harmony, if you in China, OS or Linux? Do you know any other?
I mean, like, how are you going to work without Okta today? How are you going to work without Google Drive or O365?
Exactly. How are you going to work without internet? Your internet is third party as well. Unless you are, 95% of the majority percentage of the companies still use an ISP, which means everything flows through ISP.
And there, we can start talking about academic style attacks like BGP, routing and whatnot. And we're right back to the start of this, which is like, understand that as we see in things like NIST CSF, there are differences between a stuffed animal-based organization, oh, hi, puppy, a stuffed animal-based manufacturer, and the government. They have different requirements. The government does spend time to air gap networks. The person who's running an IoT device making stuffed animals for pennies on the margin is not going to spend the money in order to do that. And so you have different risk tolerances that are derived from the business.
Thank you. Before I go to my next question, you mentioned a few stuff that I want to highlight. I see many CISOs, they didn't come from technical environment. They don't like to follow the needs. One thing what I like, and I know you do it for a living, it's out of passion as well, knowing what's happening around you. You are fully aware of all the incident that you mentioned was in the news just this week or latest 2-3 weeks ago. So if you're not aware of what's happening around you, you cannot protect it. This is just a recommendation to the community.
Absolutely. You can't be a CISO. Like, it is just unacceptable to be a CISO and not know what's happening in your industry, because your board is going to ask, your management layer, your executive leadership team is going to ask, hey, I read in the Wall Street Journal, tell me about this Coinbase thing. And you're going to have a good answer. You're going to have a good answer to say, if you're in the US, for instance, and doing SECs, someone's going to say, hey, what's going on with 8Ks? What does that mean? And you'll have to say, well, actually, over the last quarter, there were only 4 cybersecurity 8Ks, but we're seeing a big uptick this quarter. We already have 7. We're only halfway through the quarter. These are all related to phishing-based credential theft. That's why I'm asking for that extra $250,000, $1 million to put additional security here, or to use, I don't know, an enterprise browser was one of the things that Coinbase was talking about. And how do we protect and use that to restrict and further limit our attackers' capability to move around our environment and access sensitive customer information? Absolutely critical. I can't agree with you more.
All right, let's change the topic a little bit. I mean, we can talk all day about compliance, incident counts, but I think we have to help CISOs who struggle to define and communicate value to the board. And you mentioned a few stuff already. How should they measure success in their security program beyond compliance and incident count?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different sort of thoughts on this. There's a couple different answers depending on who you're trying to measure success to. That's where I'll start with this. If you talk to, for instance, an accountant, your head of risk, for instance, maybe, you're going to have a conversation about the capability to leverage insurance in order to quantify and then reduce the aggregate amount of risk to the organization. It's an interesting approach. If you talk to a lawyer, they're going to say, well, do we have the best practices in place so that we can resist legal scrutiny in a court of law? If I talk to a CEO, we're going to talk about customer experience. How obsessed are we with the customer? What is their experience from a security perspective, both internal and external to the organization? These are different point of views that you have to understand and be able to respond to based on the program that you're building. Importantly, there's a difference, and this is, you sort of mentioned it. We talk a lot about compliance, but compliance is actually pretty terrible from enforcing security controls that will reduce your risk in a modern environment perspective. It's great at getting the basics done, but if I say, do you have, I'll take an example that we used previously. Do you have phishing resistant MFA in place for all users? I'm not aware of any specific compliance requirements for that across all of your user base right now from any standard. That's seemingly pretty bad from an actual make sure that you're secure. But from a legal perspective, it is absolutely critical that we have some level of MFA, or we're able to meet things like ISO 27001, maybe it might be GDPR, maybe it might be any compliance that you have that day. And so the business can't function in certain respects from the compliance perspective, but from other respects, it can't function from the lack of technology perspective. And it really depends on which leader you're talking to, how you're going to measure that level of success, how you're going to quantify that, what KPIs you're going to use, and what story you're going to use to sell that.
Thank you. Talking about all this, I'm pretty sure you also kept an eye at RSA, which happened a few weeks ago. In RSA, there was a great topic by George Curtis, CEO of a very big cybersecurity company, and he said CISOs needs to find a way to the board. If they don't have a seat on the table, those organizations are in trouble. So many security leaders are fighting for a voice at the top table. What advice would you give to CISOs trying to elevate security from a technical function to a board level strategic priority?
You need to understand a couple different things. Most importantly is that these are not technical stakeholders. In a certain sense, that's true for your executive leadership team, depending on the organization you're in. But more often than not, your CTO is going to be somewhat technical. Your CIO is going to be somewhat technical, and they'll be allies to you in those conversations. When you start talking to the board, almost always, really depends on the organization, but almost always we're focused on folks with accounting backgrounds or backgrounds that can help the organization be successful. They might be on many boards. And so you're both going to have to tell a story that they can understand. You're going to have a limited amount of time to tell this story, usually less than half an hour. There are very few boards that spend hours on cybersecurity. They have many more topics to cover. And then you're going to need to do so in a way that is understandable to them. So metrics like, here is the amount of incidents that are occurring. Here is the amount of risk in our environment. Here is the compliance assessments that we've done over time and how we're scoring and how we're improving against them can be very helpful, while tying it back to things that they're familiar with. So I mentioned some of those, right? Some of those is like the news. They understand the news. They're going to ask you questions about it. They're going to ask you, hey, Alphabet had a $1.375 billion settlement with Texas AG. What's our exposure to that? What's our exposure to TikTok's $530 million GDPR fine last week, 2 weeks ago, right? These are big incidents that are going to come up, and you can tell your narrative under those guises while also providing them predictable, reproducible numbers, and remembering that they're likely going to not remember everything you say. So you need to consistently reiterate that process through and say, here's where we're investing, here's why we're investing, here's how we could do this better if you think that this is appropriate. And it really depends on the board how you're going to phrase that. The last thing I'll say is, like, board members often serve on multiple boards, or they might be executives at other organizations who report to the board. They get to hear a little bit about how this story is being pitched in various different environments, the same way that they get to see finance conversations happening across various different environments. We've done a terrible job because it's relatively new as a requirement, as George was alluding to, at least in the US, that there's a large impetus to hear about cybersecurity. And so often your board members won't know what they want to hear, what they need to hear, and what you should be telling them. And to be fair,
we should not be afraid to raise our voice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You shouldn't be afraid to tell them what the risks are, because both they and you are liable for those risks. So not telling them about that, it's almost as bad as, not doing anything from a technical side. They're there to help you, and you're there to help them understand what the risks are and how you're trying to address them.
We're at the same board, and it's really important, as you said, to pass the message right. Putting all this together, you brought an important topic into my mind. You mentioned 3 times GDPR, California Act, just US based, but we can talk about many others. And look at the regulatory landscape. It is changing rapidly. First of all, why? It's a really great income revenue. So GDPR, for example, they can charge you 4% of your
total global turnover. Yeah,
exactly, which is lots of money. And a company like you, Lyft, for example, you cannot say I'm US based. For example, me, I was grew up in Germany. I am tied to Germany, which means every time, and I'm a Lyft customer, by the way. Every time I'm Lyft, you are entitled to GDPR because I'm still sort of German, right? So which regulatory or compliance changes should we be proactively planning in the next 1-2 years? Or what are you doing before to that question? Like, how do you deal with customers like me, who's Australian, German, lives in US, and is your customer?
Well, the first thing I'll say is a lot of this is based on laws, and I am not a lawyer, and I cannot give legal advice. I should say that right off the bat.
About advice for CISOs, don't forget.
Yes, exactly. And some of us are lawyers, and most of us play lawyers effectively on TV with the amount of time we spend talking to our brothers in arms, so to speak.
Yep.
It's important that we're seeing this not as just a source of revenue, although the Texas AG settlement does seem to be a trend that is a little bit scary in that sense, but also as a forcing mechanism where organizations would not do this. There's no capitalistic incentive to demonstrate privacy because most people don't differentiate what they're going to buy based on privacy. I don't go to the supermarket, even as a privacy leader, and pick up a jar of peanut butter because one has a better privacy program than the other. I don't even know about it. Organizations and brands don't differentiate on it. It's not a differentiator to the customer, and so they don't do it. So this is in some ways the role of the government to do. Now, there are lots of questions about this process, right? I was at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and somebody who I won't name said, I actually hate how legal has taken over the privacy realm, and I really don't want that to happen to security. And I said, I totally disagree with you, actually. Like, first off, I'm very happy I have compliance organizations and requirements that come forward that I have to meet, because it gives me the leverage that I need to get the controls that I want in place. Simply doing the bare minimum on compliance or privacy regulations is an option, but it is far more effective for your customer to leverage the requirements that you have to give good security, to provide good privacy. At least this is the mentality that we use at Lyft, which is we say, this is what the compliance requires, but now I have the opportunity to really focus on this. Let's go over here to the next level of what we can provide. Let's provide additional data privacy. Let's provide additional notification, et cetera. So I'm personally pretty excited about this sort of approach. It is highly effective. And one of the things that we continue to see, you asked about trends in this area. Obviously, EU AI has come into a lot of folks' periphery, particularly as you think the GDPR fines are large. 7% of global annual turnover is the current EU AI requirement, or maximum possible fine. Now, of course, it's important to highlight that those risks that emerge from these legislations, one is trying to prevent getting the fine from occurring at all, following the legislation. But also, if you are trying to do that, but you can't for some reason, right? You just don't have enough time. Almost nobody, I don't think anybody that I know of, has actually hit the maximum GDPR fine of 4%. So the other part of it is, one is impact, and the other is likelihood. One is likelihood, trying to prevent the fine from occurring, and one is impact, trying to reduce the size of the impact of the fine by saying, I'm not purposely skirting this. I've done X, Y, Z in order to make my program as compliant as possible. We are planning to do Y, but we never got to it, and now we'll have to do it, and we'll take a fine as part of that, and we'll work towards bettering ourselves. We admit that this is the situation, and working with the regulators, be it the California AG, which you just mentioned for CCPA, or like the data authorities out in the EU, to really understand what problems you have and leverage that opportunity to be successful. So yeah, we've seen EU AI. I'll say the California CCPA regulation has a draft statement out for algorithmic decision making, which is very similar in nature to some of the AI regulations, but more encompassing. This is definitely where we're starting to see this go, at least from our point of view. Obviously, we continue to see things around targeted advertising. That's pretty hot, particularly in the EU, but I think we'll see some more of that coming out of the US at various states. And you start seeing, from the regulation perspective, states overruling or overriding things like HIPAA and providing additional controls to cover individuals with healthcare records. So we saw that from New York, we're seeing that from Washington. So there's a lot of that above and beyond, and it's a major onus on companies to continue to follow the regulation, but it is good for them ultimately to be able to do so.
Thank you. One more question actually that I want to ask. Usually it's very rare that I meet with CISOs that I'm a customer as well. Now, I don't know if you can talk about it, but I'm a Lyft customer, and I'm not just saying that because you are here. You know that I protect, I care about my security, and I know who's leading the security and privacy at Lyft, and that's why I know I can trust you. But because you know me well, I travel a lot. As a result, I spend lots of time within your cars, within your service. More importantly, my kids are using Lyft as well. So how do you protect my data, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, and it's a question that you should ask all the security people in your life, which is, how do I know you're doing a good job? There's some obvious ways that we can demonstrate this, right? Like any major organization, we're beholden to various different compliance requirements, be it PCI, be it ISO 27001, be it things like CCPA, which we just mentioned from the California side. We also go beyond that and do things that many other organizations do to assess our general industry capabilities, things like NIST CSF, things like gap assessments along the way. But we could talk about compliance all day. And we can talk about compliance because it's a really good measuring stick to be able to say, this is not something operating out of your grandmother's garage. This is actually a situation where we have tens of people working full-time to support security and privacy operations. A company has made an investment here. The sort of second way, though, is really where we invest from the technical side. So there's this compliance pillar, but there's also the stay ahead of general best practices in terms of the actual technical capabilities of your organization. As a SaaS-based organization, which is very rare, we have 0 servers pretty much on premise or in a data center. Everything is in cloud providers. We have very strong capabilities to do things like move to phishing-resistant MFA, to require that for every access, for every single capability within our environment, with no real exceptions, right? This is a good capability. We can do things like invest in areas that we are not technically legally required to, but are helpful to us to drive. Things like data classification tagging, where we can say, hey, this data does have customer data in it, even though we manually tagged it the wrong way once. Now we can automatically review it and then make decisions about who can access that data and when they can access it and how it can be accessed and how we audit that. So being able to know about your environment and spend on security not just helps, obviously, the customer, it actually helps make a better product overall. It is more useful to the customer to know about what their privacy capabilities are, what the security capabilities are of the organization, if they want to have and become a power user for your app and have faith in you as a company. And that's what we try and do. We try and stay well ahead of the competition. We try and go and provide evidence of the fact that we're doing this, and we obviously invest. The fact that I'm here as a heavily technical resource leading an organization is just one aspect of the evidence that we continue to invest in cybersecurity and privacy at a large scale.
Thank you. All right. I mean, you and I, we can talk all day. But before I close up, you and I worked in multiple projects together. I don't know if you still remember. We were in the blueprint of a very popular cybersecurity certification, which is called Cybersecurity First Responder. Then you contributed in my book as well. And today, I'm just giving a free ebook for everybody who watches the show. They can just scan the QR code at the end or look at the comments. My incident response to business continuity book will be available for free, which I think you contributed either in that one or the cybersecurity guide. I don't remember, but doesn't matter. Free book is always good. I think resources like that is valuable for all of us. And Chaim, I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. This is not just a favor for me. This is a big favor for the whole CISO community. And as you know, this is a global initiative. At LinkedIn, we have more than 7,000 people. And this is, all across the globe, and we're going to grow together because we are only better together. And as you mentioned, look, incidents can happen, but we have to learn from each other because we can only defeat cybercrime if we work together.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself, Erdal.
Before I let you go, do you have any closing notes?
You keep doing what you're doing. Part of the solution is education, as you said, and that could be via books, that could be via LLMs, that could be via talk shows. It is everything that you can digest as a leader or as someone growing to be a leader is going to make you better. There's no harm in learning from what others are doing. And I appreciate you taking the opportunity to have me on and try and further that end goal.
Anytime, my friend. Thank you very much. With this, we're coming to the end of one more show. Actually, this is probably the first show that you're going to watch. Chaim was my first guest, and we're going to have many others coming very soon. So keep in touch. Thank you very much for watching.